and resolve it wherever we can.
Reject it.
To infinity and beyond. So yeah, I guess in a way, some of us are probably all traumatized out. Certainly I'm starting to feel that way. But we're going to finish up, you know?
Good.
The spirit of completion and all that, exactly. We're the kind of people who do what we say we're going to do. Yeah.
We don't want to go to hell.
Not on a Sunday.
Maybe Monday.
Yeah, Monday morning, that's hell time. So yeah, I mean, I just want to recap just briefly and say again in the spirit of why we're looking at trauma, and that, in a sense, trauma exists in the relative world. It is primarily the sense of self that experiences trauma. On a level of ultimate reality, there is, in a sense, no trauma at all. The great mystics of the world have done their thing, have connected, and they come back, and it's usually a pretty good message, isn't it? It's a pretty loving, joyful, everything's all right forever kind of message. Everything's all right forever. Trauma exists in the relative world to the personal sense of self. You have to be something to be thrown, to be knocked. Heidegger said we were thrown into this world. Thrown. And it's the impact that hurts. But when we examine that personal sense of self at some times, we realize it doesn't actually exist in the way we think it does. And it's that recontextualization that helps us on an ultimate level with trauma healing. Today we're going to cover Uranus through the archetypes of Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. We're going to try and take any questions on the trauma teachings all around, summarize and conclude, and we might want to say a couple of observations or words about Uranus in transit if we have time. But more importantly are the last three archetypes, and in the final session, leaving some time for questions. And if there are no questions, having an early lunch.
What was the second part that you just said there is no trauma in the...
In the ultimate reality, at the level of ultimate truth. I mean, let's examine this, you know. Ramana Maharshi, when he was a teenager, had an experience where he went out. He got it, big time. And he would not have survived if there had not been people who just cared for his body. He was found lying by the side of the road in the woods, flies eating off his saliva and flesh. He had to be picked up, fed, and taken care of. He didn't care about it. It wasn't a trauma. When you go to a certain point, one surmises, having not been there myself, it doesn't matter if you live or die. And that's not a trauma. That's an insight. That's a liberation. Now, just because we're not all fully enlightened beings, or that we're like intending to be, or we're like little baby bodhisattvas rather than full-grown ones, doesn't mean we can't learn from the nature of ultimate truth. In ultimate truth, experience is non-dual. There is no personal self to observe an impact event. Therefore, there can be no trauma. Because there can be no separate sense of self to experience something hitting and hurting us. Yes?
So trauma from Uranus is on a mental level.
Yes.
Does that mean that the more air and the more Mercury aspects that you have and the more Mercurian activity you have in your chart, that you are going to suffer more from the Uranus trauma?
Well, there's two things to observe there. One, when we say Uranus is mental trauma, we mean the mental body, as in the sense of the theosophical writers, yeah? The mental body that manifests through the astral, through the etheric, into the physical. So we're talking about a subtle plane aspect of the mind. So we're not talking about the mind on the same level as Mercury-type thoughts or words. At the same time, people who have negative or stressed Mercuries can respond to trauma particularly badly because they repeat it as a self-talk inside over and over. So the answer to your question on one level is yes, but the ultimate level you're asking it from, we need to reframe what we mean by mental body. Uranus as a mental trauma is a mental body. It's an issue of where we manifest from, if you like. The power of thought to manifest. What Alice Bailey refers to in Esoteric Psychology 1 and 2 and Treatise on White Magic as thought forms. Create thought forms that come into existence. This is the kind of level of the mind we're talking about, rather than just that little conversation you're having in your head, should I have pancakes for breakfast or eggs, you know, or whatever. That's the one I had this morning anyway. Carbs or protein, yeah? Which will be best for me? I went carbs, actually, because I'd gone protein every other day. Thought I'd try something different. Besides, I needed to soak up some residual Jack Daniels. Hence the great American inventions of, you know, ludicrously fattening stuff for breakfast, you know? You come downstairs, there's full-on meat cooking for breakfast. For breakfast, meat. I mean, wow. And yeah, anyway. Yeah, well, that's it. Well, we have a fry-up in England, but I mean, I consider a fry-up something you have like once or twice a year as a kind of like weird event, you know? Yeah, fry-up. Yeah, it's like eggs, sausages, beans, other straight black pudding, which is some, you know, inner part of some animal fried. Am I selling it to you folks? Yeah. So that level of mental activity where we try and decide things on a day-to-day basis or how we feel about ourselves or certain things is not the mental plane we're talking about when we talk about Uranus trauma. We're talking about traces in the mind stream. The subtle aspect of consciousness that bridges even between lives. There's a paradox here because in a sense when you die, individuality dies too. The body-mind dies, but there is a subtle aspect of consciousness. And you know, there are all sorts of fine ways of looking at this in different spiritual traditions, but even the Buddhists who don't see self or any form of God in an outside sense recognize that there is some subtle aspect that traces from life to life because, for example, when the Dalai Lama is chosen, the reincarnation, he picks from his mala and his, you know, his prayer beads and his accoutrements, his vajra and his bell from his previous life, you know? You have to have an aspect that recognizes. It's a subtle aspect growing all the time, a subtle, more permanent aspect of consciousness. This aspect is the aspect we're talking about when we refer to Uranus. It's not a conventional thought process. It's remembered on a pattern level, on a deeper level inside. It creates furrows, if you like, or like little flecks, you know, like they do those tests to find out if you've got something in your body, and you take a kind of liquid that shows up under radioactive or X-ray or whatever. It's like that, barium or something. Little subtle flecks in your stream. Yes?
Does the Mercury in Gemini represent a trauma that is on the superficial level of Mercury, or is it on the deeper unconscious level?
Well, Mercury and Gemini, for example, Mercury and Gemini in and of themselves won't represent a trauma. They'll represent an expression of Mercury. If you add Uranus there, then yes, it does in a way. It has the deep level, but also the actual level where we function in that way is also being impacted, yes. When you ally Mercury with a trauma signature, the actual way you function may be impacted as well, yes. It's true, yeah. Pleasure. Any other questions about the general method we're looking at or its perspective? The essence of understanding this thing about ultimate truth versus relative truth is not some needless metaphysical discussion. It is an essential part of the reframing that is possible by using these methods in chart readings, because you can use this central insight to help people liberate from the existing trauma. Because you have a ground, an ultimate ground, for which to contextualize for people what's happened within the relative, within the play, within the Maya, if you like, within the endless dream of space-time. You have a spiritual or truth basis for which you can always hold, no matter how bad the trauma, it can only happen to what is ultimately a non-existent self. See the paradox there, and how weird but liberating it is? Now, we don't want to use this to detach from people's actual, real, personal pain and stuff. That is real and valid, and it can never be denied. But we want to hold it as an awareness of what's possible on a larger level, so that we are a doorway to it, so we are a potential opening when we look at the chart for them to step through. We don't want to be, avoiding or trying to say that someone's personal pain isn't real because of this insight. We just want to hold it as a potential awareness for them to have a liberation potential. So that's the context, if you like, which we can work with this stuff. In spiritual truth, we progressively realign from the sense of a personal self to the sense of a divinity in life, a sacredness in life that manifests through us as a person. Important recontextualization. There is a divinity expressing through us in the field of life. And the divine is the essence of what maintains that field. Therefore, the personal self is not manifesting under its own volition. So there is a level you can go back to in which the trauma is perceived completely differently, in potential. I'm not trying to tell anyone what their view of reality should be or what their faith. There are many approaches, there are many ways of coming to truth. I am not sectarian like that. But the great traditions of the world converge on many central points. And the essence of the sacredness of life, as larger than the personal self, is central to all of them. And we can make a reasonable basis that that's a good foundation to approach, to ultimately contextualize trauma. Because that's a good approach to ultimately contextualize anything that ever happens, or anything you ever think or feel. And karma, after all, is only the accumulation of what you have thought, felt, and done. Every thought, every feeling, every fantasy, every little subconscious moment exists within the mind stream. It's both scary and liberating. Anyway, as we look at these final stages of the archetypes in a traumatic way, it seems important to have this sense of an ultimate context for holding trauma. Cool. Any questions? So I'm going to go to Uranus, Capricorn, 10th house, or with Saturn. Here we have trauma relating to potential traumas for a psychology of futility, pessimism, and despair. Because the goals you have worked towards in life do not seem to be reachable or have been reached. There may be past life memories pertaining to having had no choice, no control. A dominant culture or force has overcome one in some way. Capricorn is an interesting archetype from this point of view. There hasn't been time for an ultimate viewpoint on this in these talks, but the planets have nodes, just like the moon has nodes. The nodes are just abstract points in space where a moving object crosses the ecliptic. And when it crosses upwards, it's the north node, and when it crosses downwards, it's the south node. The planetary nodes of Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn are in Capricorn. The planetary nodes, the south nodes of Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn are in Capricorn. This level to which every planet has a node. So like the moon has a node, the south node of the moon, the south nodes of Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn are in Capricorn. No, just they have been for centuries. Everyone in this room has them in that position. Everyone you remember in your family, and everyone that's just been born in your family. And here we see, and this is a subject I've spoken on in some workshops, and indeed my chapter in the Insights to Evolutionary Astrology book is about this. My earliest thoughts on it, at least. So I did write that a while ago, but this notion to which civilization has emerged from this Capricorn archetype. Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn, south nodes. Their past is in Capricorn. The rise of culture in a hierarchical model. The rise of civilizing forces from a dominant perspective. Capricorn is a beautiful archetype. Let's not be hard on Capricorn. You know, psychologically, Capricorn can be about accepting true responsibility for who one really is. But in a traumatized sense, what it means historically is there's often a sign where dominant cultures aggress on other cultures and take prisoners or disempower. And this issue of disempowerment is one of the trauma signatures in the Uranus Capricorn, Uranus 10th, Uranus Saturn signature. Fundamental disempowerment. There could be a trauma pertaining to the father or the family generally. A sense in which the environment is restrictive, controlling, or judgmental. A trauma pertaining to judgments. Can also pertain to unresolved grief. When Saturn is allied with Uranus in a trauma signature, it can also mean that the trauma signature, at least in parts, had a physical aspect to it. It was physically damaging. It cost a life. It cost. In our chart example behind me, I've been, you'll forgive me, too lazy to rectify it. We're looking at this as a Uranus in the 10th. It's clearly that when you know this person. I mean, even here it's conjunct the midheaven. This is the birth time I was given. 1 p.m. is often an indication that the birth time has been slightly approximated. It'll be like 1:03 or something like that. The place, can anyone see? Bournemouth, England. 1 p.m., September 19th, 1967. And we're looking at, really we're probably looking at like 1:05 p.m. or something. We're looking at Uranus on the midheaven, Uranus in the 10th house in Virgo, with Pluto and the Sun. So we have that Pluto-Uranus generational trauma signature, but we also, in allying this with the Sun, see that it plays out centrally and powerfully in this person's core energy. All on the midheaven. And to some extent, this is an empowerment signature, isn't it? Pluto with the Sun on the midheaven. You know, it wouldn't be a surprise if this person had a powerful job. And this person does have a powerful job. That's handy.
You knew it.
I did. This is a, partner in a law firm. You know, when you've bought yourself in. How do you think this person feels about that at times? Michelle says guilty. Any other thoughts and feelings?
Associated with the work she does.
Yeah. Denial, dissociation. It's never enough. Yeah, and he's never enough. He's never good enough. He's the head of the team. He's a senior partner. In the good years of the economy, he was making megabucks. And now, because of the economy, he's not. He's not making that much more than his therapist. And he works a hell of a lot harder. It's taken that literalness to expose what was always there, underlyingly. Always the sense of not being good enough, but when the high times are there, you let it roll. You don't need to bother with it the same way. The Virgo trauma. Uranus with Sun Pluto, that inner sense, those messages. Where it really comes from, 10th house, is the father who was a teacher who had a sort of breakdown and left teaching because he couldn't cope and went through these cycles of that experience in the home. And this is the eldest of two boys growing up, watching his father do that and internalizing this sense that I'm not quite up to it. And he becomes hyper-vigilant, incredibly hardworking, super serious, still has young skin, not a very old guy, but his whole demeanor and look and dress is like an older man, you know.
Well, I would just think that having, Saturn conjunct the moon, could have a little to do with that as
Yes,
well.
of course.
In the house where you would expect it to be, parental and a lot of conditioning that.
Coldness as well, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
A potential for a coldness in the home at times.
So you've got to.
The mother in this family is extremely active and dominant. She wears the trousers. Often Saturn, 4th house people, like my good self, have mothers who, take charge, shall we say, diplomatically. Yeah? Absolutely, and it's a real activity sense, but the sense with the mother is on some level that the activity is at least a partial concealment of subtle feelings of not good enough or what am I doing. And ironically, this man has a long-standing problem with the mother and that point of view. And in particular, her puritanical adherence to nutritional values, to the level that, he's out with her and his kids, and she's just making constant comments about what they're eating, how it's bad for them, and his sort of seething about it. Disempowered with his mother, disempowered at times with his wife. Massive, powerful job out in the world. And we see some of the causes if we look to the south node, in the 11th, and the expectations of others that have formed some of this person's push out into the world. Following the expectations of others, wanting to fulfill the fantasy of success, expansion, the Venus, Jupiter. And we see in the north node in the 5th in Aries, the need to take a step for himself, what he really wants. So he works, his baseline week is a 50-hour week. It's realistically more. And then after he does that to the point that he can barely stand up because he's hallucinating with tiredness, he dreams endlessly of just taking a backpack off to South America and getting lost on his own. Yeah. You can see it, can't you? It's like ding-dong clear, isn't it? And yet, you support that side of him. Yeah. He can't do it as yet, and that's the impasse that was reached and the lack of appointment we've had since that impasse was reached. Who knows, because that happened before, and then he just contacted me again when it got too bad. He's one of those people that commits to the process, even in his busy schedule, when the psychology of futility is so strong that his personal experience of despair is unbearable. As soon as it evens off just slightly, he drops therapy. And that's a common thing in therapy. And it's nice to be able to help folks or be a space for people to air things so that they can drop that feeling. But the lack of following up inevitably means there's often a momentum to feel that feeling again. It's an unusually clear example of a certain type of structure in a chart, isn't it? It's really easy to see this chart that some kind of step just for himself. And it doesn't have to be going off to another country. It doesn't have to be as extreme as that. That's partly the South Node Libra extremity. You know, this man has kids and a wife. But it's just about doing something for himself and not those projected needs. Are we getting some church music from over there?
So he just doesn't feel good enough to be able to get enough help.
Yes.
You know, he's got Neptune in the 12th house.
But it's also the secret fear that it will all collapse, isn't it? He feels like a fraud.
There's a little sacrificial thing.
Yes, absolutely. Sacrificial thing going on, yeah. Go on.
Well, then with the Uranus and close to the Sun, there's such a desire to be revolutionary, unique, and groundbreaking. But with the Virgo, it's like this contained
Yes.
piece, and so
It's a boxed-in revolutionary. It comes out in all his social shenanigans. You know, he goes to like posh lawyer conferences and drinks like 2 bottles of wine a night, just schmoozing, you know, and breaking out like that. But then he comes back to his life even more tired and wrecked than he was before. And then he can't stop working because they have the dream for the big house and they were going to convert a castle in the south of France and stuff like that. They dropped that in the first few weeks of therapy when I, asked him about how long that would tie him into having to do this level of work. And we concluded, I don't know, about 20 years or something. Well, good question. I don't always like to do that with my clients, but okay, you put me on the spot. Off the cuff. First stage individuated, scared of the second stage step, maybe. He's at the third stage consensus in the expression in his life, but we know from his psychology that that's not where he really is. But he's too afraid to break out of the Saturn impulse. So yeah. Yeah, sorry, one sec, go on.
You mentioned his mother, what about his father?
Sorry, well, we'll come to that. So Gary's asking about his father, yes.
How much guilt did he internalize over his father's peaks and valleys?
Well, that's it. So, same question. So it's good. He watches his father have this sort of breakdown, not being able to cope with his job, and then he watches as his mother increasingly compensates for that, and the father becomes increasingly passive, and his mother does everything. And then this originally fairly go-getting kind of guy, now, because of the busyness of work, succeeds everything to his wife. She arranges every holiday and every trip and everything. And he's falling into the same pattern. He recognizes he's falling into the same pattern, but he can't get out of it. That's, partly guilt, partly an identification. The father is the big hidden key to it. Because in his heart, this man wants to spend more time with his father, but because his mum's compensated so much for the father's passivity, he can never get him alone. He wants to find his father, but he doesn't feel he can. And there's actually quite a kind of sadness and poignancy about that. And he's a really sweet guy, this guy, committed, responsible guy, yeah? Well, if no more questions, we'll leave that example for the time being. Oh. Oh, Lilith.
It's an asteroid.
Oh, yeah, I don't know which one that is. Yeah, there is an asteroid Lilith, and then there's a black Lilith, and there's a point in space. And okay, that's black Lilith.
Why is it the one that consistently shows up under your chart?
Because it's the only one solar fire puts on. Yeah. I don't understand Lilith. I'm always just putting it on to try and make the effort to try and understand Lilith. Kristen Fontana's taught about Lilith so many times, and I've listened to it so many times, and I'm just hoping one day to actually remember it properly. Yeah.
Even though it's a goddess, and I went to that talk, and And even though Dark Lilith is a goddess, it still applies to men, of course. And it's kind of like finding that wild individualness inside of yourself. Finding
Well,
your
wow.
own,
I
yeah.
mean, look where
Like
it is.
North
Yeah.
Node. So if he
That's
could,
just perfect, isn't it?
instead of running and the backpacking trip and going away,
Yes.
yeah.
His desire to break free.
And
Yes.
North Node in Aries, unless they have a lot of dominant stuff in their charts, they're very passive.
He
They
is
don't
very
want to
passive.
go towards that Aries North Node. They
He's
want to
very
stay
passive
in
guy.
the Libra.
Very passive. Like I say, he's only motivated to take the therapeutic step when he's so desperate, he's waking up in the middle of the night with like night terror, you know?
And, I mean, he would be, because everything, where the North Node is, the house, the sign, the Lilith signature, it's all about, like, orienting towards individuation. And
Yes. And self-actualization, yeah.
But he has that Mars in the first house, I mean.
He can be really honest about it. He can be really upfront about it. He's a paradox. You can be talking to him and you think it's only a matter of time and this guy's going to go off and do something really cool. And then you can just literally meet him the next week and just think this guy's never going to leave this job. Maybe there's a way that we can at least get him out of this partner situation, because the thing is, with the economy as it is, that level of partner is tied into the business. The business goes under. And this is the kind of business that makes all its profit in the last 2 days of the year, that pays everyone. That's the level of stress these guys are under. A partnership law firm, like property law, legal law, a massive law firm, like hundreds of employees. Because the expenses and overheads are so high, they make their, whatever it is, 7 million profit or whatever in the last day and a half, as they bill everything in that final period. And if they don't make it, and they don't make it by a certain amount, he's liable personally, to an extent. That's stress, isn't it? That's like a whole new level. And that's what made it hard for me to talk him out of certain types of stress, because he actually explained that to me properly, how it worked one day. And all I said was, oh my God, man. I just couldn't live with that. And he's just looking at me poignantly. But you see, it's all gravy when the economy's the other way. When the economy's the other way, you're drawing $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 a month. When the economy's the other way. Maybe more. I'm not sure I've even added it up right, the conversion, yeah.
So would you recommend that he do some regression therapy? His South Node is in the house of trauma, and his mother and father
It'd be
have-
beautiful, but getting this man to do this, zero chance.
Well, I was going to say the same thing, like when the pattern is such that you have the awareness and you still can't shift the pattern, it's probably somatic and energetic, and it's only that kind of work that would probably shift
Well,
the
actually,
behavior.
yeah, maybe I'm being too limited. Maybe if, you see, what can you do when the therapeutic rapport only exists when the person's so desperate that they'll actually come and see you? And the person has no viewpoint for understanding these things, conspicuously doesn't believe in past lives, is a rationalist, and accepts only because of the word-of-mouth reason that he comes to see me, someone he knows and trusts, who knows and trusts me, that the wacky side of what I do is okay and can be sort of ignored. Because a number of my clients make a sort of silent deal to just call me an old hippie occasionally and ignore that bit.
There's got to be something inside him that connects with you and knows
Yes.
that there's something more.
Yes.
But
But recently, when my last trip to the States, Minneapolis and Norwalk, he was going to email when he got back. It's the summer, he's having a break. He hasn't emailed, hasn't contacted. And I haven't contacted because I'm not fishing for that commitment. If he wants to make it, I'm there. He knows where I am.
Also, he's got a yacht in his Chiron in Pisces. So there's something. I mean, there's some
Yes. Oh,
signature.
he's a paradox, like I say. Yeah. Good luck to him. What's the time? How long have we got? 20 in this hour. Okay, cool. So let's look at, let's talk about Uranus in Aquarius, the 11th house. This can correspond to trauma about feeling like a person is living an inner lie. feeling alienated or different. Someone feeling like they're living an inner lie, feeling alienated or different. Yes.
Speak about that living in a lie. What you mean by that, please?
With the Uranus in its own house or sign, you're looking at the individuation issue as the central issue. The individuation issue is always in relationship to the consensus. And to the extent that the consensus still exerts a hold, the person can feel suppressed by that. And you can talk about trauma where for multiple lifetimes or in this life the person has felt too restricted by Saturn to actually become who they really are. That's the central nature of the trauma in this placement. You can also talk about a situation where one is on the edges of society, feeling alienated from the group. Can also correspond to trauma around sudden endings, fragmentation, relationships that just terminate, like out of the blue, sudden, shocking loss. Excuse me. Someone you know and love is your friend 1 minute, and literally, overnight, they're not. They're gone. You're not going to know them again. You don't know why necessarily. Or the reason that's given isn't fully convincing. Yes.
The experience is also that you end relationships suddenly, too.
It could be, yes.
Yeah.
The conflict that arises, the endings could come from the person themselves, yes. Yes.
Or like being thrown out of a group, like excommunication.
Exactly, excommunication. Told you're not good enough, or some sort of fundamental sense of value you have isn't right, or... you think of the Uranus and Virgo generation, and those guys that have it in the 11th house. The persecutory internalization, You're not good enough to belong, the inner voice. Yeah, please, Michelle. Can you click on Verde? I think it's the one underneath or the one underneath that.
That Uranus must be transiting his fourth house right now. The moon.
So here we have a chart example. September the 10th, 1952, 5:11 a.m., Denver, Colorado. Don't know if any of you guys have been to Denver. But no, I haven't seen it myself. I've been to this city called Ramada. Have you guys been there? It's a pretty intense place, It's starting to take over my mind. Yeah, it's full on. I've taken to drinking and dancing. Yeah. Yeah. All right, wow. Well, I'm Pluto. I'm okay. Uranus in Cancer in the 11th house. Square Saturn, Neptune, Venus, Libra. Edge of the 2nd house. Pluto, South Node, Leo in the 12th, North Node, Aquarius in the 6th, Jupiter square to the nodes, the whole axis of trauma signature. Uranus in the 11th, the potential for the inner lie, feeling alienated from who they truly are, where they truly belong. Uranus in Cancer, where they truly belong, takes on a particular type of tone. Their emotional body, what's home, where do they really come from? Square to Saturn, Neptune and Libra. Now, I've spoken about this generation before, the traumatic memories pertaining to forced enslavement. Saturn in the trauma signature, the psychology of futility we spoke about just a moment ago, caused by dominator cultures aggressing. Saturn in Libra in the second house, with Neptune in the second house. Neptune often pertaining to slavery because of the sacrificial element, the disempowerment and loss. When in trauma signatures now, not just, just Neptune all the time means that. But I just want to use this chart just to illustrate a principle in a way, and it's, a very interesting experience the person had. I mean, we can see also, can't we, clearly, there's a core trauma to the child, the inner emotional body, and it took an actual physical dimension, Saturn. So age 6 or 7, actually, oddly, when solar arc Venus goes to Saturn and solar arc Saturn goes to Neptune at the same time, this person was molested by a man on the street where she was playing as a child. Taken off from the street and molested. Years later, when her own daughter was coming to that same age, was basically that same age, out of the blue, this lady who was a hard-working, like a kind of scientific health administrator type role person, just felt the call, and they were not living in this area anymore. They lived somewhere else. So they bought a plane ticket and came to Colorado, and they journeyed on their own, hired a car, all just on a level like they don't know why they're doing it. And they drive to the Mesa Verde. At the airport, they bought a cookie, a chocolate chip cookie. Incidentally, the same candy that was used to lure her as a 7-year-old. And she drove to the Mesa Verde on her own in a complete state of unknowing, not knowing why. And when she gets to the top of the Mesa Verde, she doesn't go to the hotel place or the complex. She knows exactly where she's going. She journeys through the paths on the Mesa Verde on her own, and at night she places the chocolate cookie on what she discovers later turns out to be the birthing stone that they used in the Mesa Verde, that she's just walked herself to without guide. And she places the cookie. Now she just did this. That when we spoke about this, I'm not sure she'd ever spoken about this event. She just carried it privately. And I just said, oh, wow, you were making an offering on the altar for your little girl who'd been hurt. And literally, this whole process happened in such an other state. She hadn't thought of it like that. And it was kind of mind-blowing in the moment to her to recognize what that process was for her. You see, she's living the Jupiter skip step, isn't she? And she's living the memory, the inner lie, because after some other experiences, she stays out there alone in the Mesa Verde. I mean, a pretty strange experience by many people's standards. This is a kind of regular woman, no real interested in mystical type stuff or anything like that. But she has a dream a bit later, and she follows it to this, Pueblo place. And the guy in the dream, she meets this girl out wandering. Her father turns out to be the medicine man. When she sees him, he's the guy from the dream. She approaches him. They say something at the place like, we don't just do this kind of work with anyone, kind of go away kind of thing. She tells them about the dream. And they say pretty much explicitly, wow, that's the only way we're going to work with a white person if you had a dream like that. And they work with her for 3 days, doing these kind of feather brushing and saging. And she just goes through all of this without having any frame of reference in that time. It just happens to her. and she tries to kind of recover. And the shock is, I mean, this is a kind of reconstructive trauma in one sense, isn't it? Although it's kept completely separate from the rest of her life. She doesn't literally talk to anyone about it. It's a complete shock around the inner lie, or the change in where she's really come from. There obviously is some deep memory of this kind of experience. She knew where she was going, but she can't even relate to it like that in this lie.
Maybe it's stating the obvious, but that's a pretty strong 12th house. And this is very,
Yes.
and what you're saying, it's like textbook
Exactly.
12th house stuff.
Exactly, and Pluto South Node in the 12th. See, Pluto South Node is a signature of bringing through enormous material from prior lives. Gifts from prior lives, but also restrictions from prior lives. And it is a massive repeat, relive signature, arguably the biggest of all. She is reliving something that expresses her karma in these situations perfectly. And it's this point in her life, as she is, a year or two away from her second Saturn return, that the real potential to make sense of all of this has come about. The shock here for her originally on an ego level was that she was doing it at all. And then afterwards, it's taken years, even decades, to realize that the other shock is that since she did it, that actually might be more meaningful than many of the other things she's ever done with her life. That was not obvious to her at the time. This was genuinely a complete bolt out of the blue.
Often in situations like this, what happened to the parents will then end up happening to the child. And it was almost like she came at the right time to not pass that karma on to her daughter.
Yeah, that's so true. It's beautiful, isn't it? The fact that her daughter had reached the same age when something bad happened to her, her first Saturn square, is the part of what inspires her to make the gift to her past self, the girl in her. And it's her love for her daughter that inspires the love for the child inside herself, which enables then suddenly this Uranian transformation where this whole other memory, other experience floods through her consciousness and takes her back to something she already knew, Pluto South Node. Jupiter skipped step, a connection with the land and with a sense of belonging, a shamanic birthing point. And she makes the adjustment. She gives the offering. It's truly magical. Yeah, it's inspirational. I mean, I was profoundly moved. I did a reading for this person a while ago, and then at a talk I gave, having not even realized she was at that talk, she had a kind of intuitive flash at what I was speaking about with the evolutionary astrological material. And she went into that altered space again, and she got lost going home. She lived not that far from where the talk was, but it took her 4.5 hours or something to get home. She got lost in the woods, literally. And she rang me afterwards, and we talked about this again. And I'm not going to talk about this chart too much more, because we have an opportunity now to do something with this other stage of integrating this material. But she's, given me permission to talk about this event that led to this point, which was, for many years, the profound secret, and maybe even something occasionally she felt ashamed of, or just like she couldn't share to people in her world, that she held inside her. Yeah, when you have those Jupiter, when those kind of Uranian flashes happen, or those right brain flashes, sometimes you can't even find your way home when it's a route you've taken many, many times, I think we'll take a brief break now. I know it's a little... I'll take a couple of questions and we'll take a break. Yes.
If it's a non-traumatic chart, would you have anything to say about it? How would you look at it?
Okay, after we've dealt with Uranus and Pisces, can we talk about Uranus transits then and see if we can come up with any ideas? All right, remind me, okay? Brilliant. We'll take a break, folks. Let's take a reasonable break, 5 or 10 minutes, yeah? Let's just... in Pisces in the 12th house to cover. A question about transits. Brief musing on transits. Essentially, transits are context-driven like everything else, in the sense that your Uranus opposition could be the greatest thing that ever happened to you. Some of the greatest achievements of mankind happened under that transit. Carl Jung broke from Freud, had his momentary madness, built his castles in the sand by the edge of Lake Bollingen, and had a breakthrough into the collective unconscious. Rosa Parks stood up on a bus and said, "No, I won't sit in the segregated area." Uranus opposition. Yes. I'm just, those two people, those two events happened under their Uranus opposition. The potential of any significant Uranus transit is liberation. To the extent that that liberation is not possible, resisted, or under a Saturn complex, there may be trauma. There may be shock. If Uranus squares your nodes by transit, you may have an incredible opportunity to liberate something pertaining to your nodal axis. You may have the opportunity to create a future skip step by not doing so, if you like, or worse, resisting. There is no law like that. All we notice is an archetypal potential, like on the mandala last night. People talk to each other across the divides. And based on what's said, some stuff happens, or it doesn't. See, there's no simple rule that Uranus transiting something means you're going to be traumatized. Under certain Uranus transits, you might liberate trauma. Under a Uranus transit, you might have a memory emerge. You might be innocently at a workshop, like astrology, reincarnation, and the soul. Some idiot's gone to Denver and done some stuff, you know. And you might have an awakening, or you might be doing some body work, or with a friend, or, you know, and suddenly you know what happened, and suddenly you remember. Just as easily, you could disassociate and detach, and just act like nothing's going on. It's all to do with the karmic potential in each moment, and your will, your spiritual will, in response to who you really are, which is kind of the bottom line in life, always. So the transit picture of Uranus just represents a range of possibility. It could be a significant possibility for healing and liberation. It could indicate a traumatic event. Just remember again now, astrology fundamentally is non-causal. This is a non-causal symbolic correspondence we are studying. The stars do not cause anything. Your Mars transit does not cause you to have a bad day or a fight with a friend. Yeah?
So the consciousness is the cause.
The karma, as it exists inside you, relative to what you hold in mind each moment you exist. Your pre-existent karma and what you hold in mind moment by moment manifests reality. Astrology is just a symbolic correspondence to the range of possibilities within that field experience. It is non-causal. There is no idea that your significant outer transit causes you to leave your marriage. You left your marriage because you stopped loving your husband, because you wanted to choose independence. Now that might correspond with Uranus crossing the 7th house, and has been known to many a time. But it is not the same as it caused it. Yes?
Would you relate this to Jung's ideal synchronicity?
So, I'm asking to relate this to Jung's idea of synchronicity. Jung's idea of synchronicity is an acausal connecting principle. Acausal connection. So, in a sense, things happen, but there was no overt linear causation. The lady who is expressing, what was it, the story? She's expressing a dream about knowledge. And in the dream, an Egyptian scarab beetle comes to her. And she's resisting that knowledge in their process. And Jung hears this tapping against the window, and he opens the window, and in flies a big scarab beetle. And he just hands it to her, and she has the breakthrough. Did her dream cause the beetle to tap the window? Yes, no, yes, no. There's no avert, there's no linear causation. There's no temporal space-time avert causation to it. He called it an acausal connecting principle. It has some relationship to astrology. Jung, this was Richard Tarnas told me this in a really cool conversation at Norway. Really bright guy and knows loads about Jung. And he knows this because this was the day he was born that Jung wrote this letter. Richard Tarnas was born down the road from Jung in Switzerland whilst Jung was writing this letter to Wolfgang Pauli, the physicist, explaining why he hadn't read certain papers on quantum physics that had been sent because, in quotes, he was too busy studying synchronicity and astrology.
Wow.
The letter written on the day that Richard Tarnas was born. And then Richard Tarnas told this at a conference talk one time, and someone didn't believe him or challenged it. And so he went back to the collective letters and he couldn't find it himself. And he was like, in a kind of moment of self-doubt, what's this about? And then he was going through, I think it's the Synchronicity book, or one of those around that period, and he finds the letter quoted at the back in the thing, on the day he was born. But he even had someone like question it, that symbolic correspondence, and even went into some doubt about it. And when he found it again, it was like a download moment for him, the connection of his life's work to this figure who, a quantum physicist was taking seriously enough to want to send papers to, who was rejecting those papers on the basis that he was too busy studying astrology and synchronicity. So synchronicity, the acausal connecting principle, is a much better way of looking at astrology. Yes?
I just want to share an experience during my transit of Uranus during the 12th. For me was a connection in awakening to this unknown area that is the unconscious world. And through symbolism, through all the richness of the dreams world, of this area that Carl Jung called unconscious, collective unconscious.
And this is under Uranus in the 12th, transiting, that you open up to the awareness of the collective unconscious. It's very apt, isn't it? Signature.
This transit, I started to connect it very deep with all the Carl Jung feelings. Like when he was describing that he was a lone child, and most of the time he was by himself. But he said that during this time that he was by himself was the opportunity that life offered to him to get in and to have the opportunity to discover this deep energy that he says most of the people doesn't want to know about it.
Yes. It's very true, and it's very beautiful. Well, she's talking about how when transiting Uranus went through her 12th house, she opened up to the potential of the collective unconscious, just like Jung had opened up to the potential of the collective unconscious, and how she identified with aspects of Jung's childhood, which was lonely and difficult. He had a number 1 and a number 2 personality, he used to call them. And the hidden one was the one that connected in depth. And in a sense, that's what Uranus in Pisces in the 12th house is about, isn't it? Progressive disillusioning to open up to that collective space. Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to share, because it so relates to Jeffrey, the exact moment of my Uranus opposition was when I first sat in class with him. Yeah. And Uranus is, in my chart, was conjuncting my Jupiter in Pisces in the 12th, which is teacher and guru. And it was opposed my natal Uranus. And it was the exact minute to the exact second that when they opened up the class, and it was the first time I learned with him personally. And I was sitting there, I kind of looked down at my chart and said, you can't make this stuff up.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing. And these transits of Uranus in the 12th show us what the natal placement means too. Uranus 12th Pisces is this progressive disillusioning of the personal self into something greater, a greater potential, a teacher, a connection, the collective unconscious that Carmen was talking about. The trauma signature aspect of it is when the dissolution takes over the ego and it feels fractured either by external experience or internal experience. And the fracturing makes the dissolution problematic. And there can be identity loss states, sense of ego loss And there can also be like onset of mental health issues as a result, fracturing. I find a lot of the more difficult stuff with mental health stuff comes through the water houses. Damage in the 4th, 8th, and 12th. Number of cases with big Virgo signatures in the 4th where there's mental health issues. There's a progressive disillusionment which can be beautiful, which can be a spiritual awakening, but as a trauma signature can indicate it was overwhelming and the personal self was not able to maintain itself. There can also be memories of incarceration, imprisonment, being hidden away. And in our last chart example, and then I think we'll just have a general dialogue of questions. Keep it loose and just tie up any loose ends. In this last example, which I believe is on the board behind me, yeah? Is there something there? Is it not? Can I have the next chart, please? Cheers. Oh, just so, before we go, just very briefly, yeah? This person asked an astrologer if they could be an astrologer, and the astrologer told them no, they were too stupid. That's what they were told. Well, and look at the Pluto signature, the persecution. Hearing persecutory voices, the South Node in the 7th, the messages from others. She asked in this life, can I be an astrologer? Which was a question, by the way, I refused to answer, because under this karmic dynamic, it was important that she decide herself if she was going to be an astrologer or not. But the previous guy she asked said no. For which I have no answer other than to say, what the? Yeah? Really? I mean, yeah. I have nothing else to say about it, really. There were past life memories of persecution, and in this life she suffered from a very serious disability, and when she was a small child she was bullied for that disability, and as she fell down from the bullying she remembered the past life death, even as a young girl. But when we have karmic patterns of persecutory anxiety like this and taking on messages from others, sometimes it helps not to ask other people. Yeah? It becomes important to learn to validate our own power from within. So yeah, okay, brief aside on the chart that was up that I didn't think was up. And now we'll go to the other one. Thanks a lot. It's the next one down. It should scroll down. Does it not scroll down? Oh, go up. It's LL. Do you see it? LL, there, that one. Don't know why it's in the wrong order. Thanks a lot. Uranus in the 12th house in Gemini. Is that right? Don't like keep looking around. So again, I just want to keep this brief and us just have a general chat and tie up any questions. We've done a lot of examples, yeah? This lady came to see me. This is a one-off reading example. And Sawyer?
One-off.
Living proof that I do astrology readings. And, you know, she's an older lady of a certain kind of smartness of appearance. She was all in canary yellow with nice shoes and a hat. She looked like she'd just come from tea with the Queen. And she wanted to know about past life dynamics, you know. It was a straight up thing. I've heard you talk about that. Okay, I said, thinking, where do I pitch this? And, you know, not wanting to impose any ideas. You know, I only want to make suggestions and see if they ring true with a person's experience. So, stumbling around in our early dialogue, looking at the chart, I think I said something like, I think it's possible in a recent past life you lost a child or had to give one up, and because you were maybe placed in a monastic institution of some kind. That's what I came up with. Can I remember why I came up with that? Yes. Neptune conjunct the South Node, the sacrifice.
And the moon conjunct Uranus in the 12th.
Yes, exactly.
Mark, that Uranus and Gemini, those vows taken long ago.
Yes. Yeah, very good. Vows, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, there's an idea on Uranus, Gemini trauma, the third house that we didn't talk about. Yeah, vows that you take that stick around. And something stuck around here, because as I stumbled around for something that might interest her on a past life level, wondering really where she was coming from and why she was asking, she just turned to me. Actually, we did have a bit more of a dialogue first. I opened up with some more gentle stuff about family. We just established a context, and then we spoke. And she looked at me all bewildered and a little flustered. She said, "No, that's not true." I said, "Oh, I'm sorry. You know, it was just a suggestion." Thought, I don't know how much I have to backpedal here. And she said, "No, that happened to me in this life." She was in university, unwanted pregnancy. The family forcibly intervened. She was sent to an institution, like a private hospital run by nuns, where you were like sealed inside the grounds. She gave birth to the child that was taken off her and put up for adoption. And then after a few months of recovery, she was sent back to university, and that was that. And it was never spoken of again. Uranus, Gemini, in the 12th. It was a secret.
What's the year on that? I can't.
49.
Oh, no, okay.
Never spoken of again. Coming out of her marriage, and this turned out to be the reason for the reading. The powerful ex-husband or soon-to-be ex-husband was fighting for custody of the kids. And the context of the present reading was about validating her attempt to win those kids and that custody. The custody of the one child that was still of age, that was important. And her process around that. You know, the present echo of the past loss. So sometimes we can think we're telling a past life story in that sense to try and reach a story, and we're actually just talking about an early part of the life. And I guess it's shocking to some of us, you know, some of the younger people in this room, that, you know, homosexuality was illegal until the 60s or whatever, that it was still considered a mental health issue in diagnostic statisticians' manual until relatively late in the day. You know, that we live in a world where certain judgments, when I was just between school and university, I worked for 6 weeks in a mental hospital as a cleaner. Extremely intense experience on a number of levels. One of them was the shocking realization how many women in their 70s and 80s, they were there on a ward. I was talking to a guard about it because I went in there one day with this buffer machine to polish the whole floors, and no one was supposed to be in there. But there was actually about 3 or 4 women of like 70 or 80 in there, several of whom, when they saw me, started taking their clothes off and moving towards me. So I temporarily stopped polishing the floor and went to chat to one of the orderlies. And in that conversation, it emerged that several of those women were in there because they had had unwanted pregnancies in like the 20s and 30s. They had no mental health issues, but they did now. That's shocking. The reasons why people were in there. They were actually put away because that's how ashamed the family felt. It's stunning, isn't it? Maybe they kicked up a fuss, but this is in a world, in the States, when that Portuguese doctor came up with prefrontal lobotomy, there was one guy who took it upon himself to travel the whole States in a van with a kit, doing as many lobotomies as he could. And it actually happened famously to one 12-year-old boy whose mother had convinced the psychiatrist he was too unruly. And it was actually a psychiatric issue. It wasn't just a 12-year-old boy defying his mother. And he was given a prefrontal lobotomy. Legally, in the States, in the 1950s. Yes?
Mark, I was just wondering from an astrological perspective, the moon is right on Uranus. When I look at a nodal story, I often look at the moon
Yes.
to see if it's, involved. With this moon, Uranus in Gemini,
Yeah.
The memory is short-term memory. It's not necessarily from a past life. But it seems like that's why her soul had some kind of memory, when she came into, it
Yeah.
sounds a little confusing.
No, but this has happened before, hasn't it? She is, in this life, undergoing an experience that happened in a much more pronounced and developed way. In this, it's like a little traumatic aside, isn't it? She's just grabbed out of her college life. She sort of squeezes the kid out, and it's taken away like some puppy dog to some other life, and she's shunted back in. A little sort of traumatic aside, which has some massive life-defining effect on a person's consciousness, yes. But presumably is a repeat of multiple past lives where the experience was extended.
Well, this is a not nice example of Gemini being opposite Sagittarius in it, which is truth and natural law.
Yes.
It's the complete opposite of that.
This is a reversal of natural law, isn't it? It is, on some level, primarily offensive. It's primarily offensive in a number of ways. One, a child is just separated from its mother for no good reason and has no early bonding experience, setting it up for all sorts of potential issues down the line. Two, her power as a human being, and especially as a woman, is just completely denied in every possible way. And three, sex is judged as if it's some terrible evil that we all need to hide from. And that's part of the karma of being born in England, isn't it? Dealing with those kinds of past life messages. I don't know any English guys, but I'm sure that if I did, they'd have some repressed stuff from past life Christian lifetimes about sex. But if I do meet any one day, I'll share that idea with them. But it's extreme here, isn't it? But the other form of extremity here is the hiddenness, because the trauma here is normalized completely in the life. The whole routine, the whole act is that this is just completely okay and normal. It's just a little aside, darling, We'll get your life back on track, don't worry. Yes, Joyce.
I just had a thought. I worked in psychiatric hospitals for 12 years in the 60s and 70s, and if Uranus, there was a lot of shock treatment.
Yes.
And there was a lot of lobotomies that had already been done. They weren't doing that anymore. But
Yes.
I was just wondering how Uranus would fit in with all
That's
the
very,
shock
exactly, that looks like a shock treatment signature, doesn't it? You could imagine incarceration for mental health reasons in the past, as well as for religious reasons. Yes, something like that, exactly. I personally find the history of mental health treatments fascinating. I think it's an important indication of how we really feel about ourselves as a whole. And yeah, I'm looking into some research. I'm hoping to at least think about how it might apply to astrological archetypes. I don't think there'll be direct correlations necessarily, but
Now it's drugs. It was shock treatments to control people.
Yes.
Lobotomies, and now it's drugs.
yeah, the fantasy of drugs, the materialization problem that I've spoken about before, the literalization, that it's a biochemical problem, and the billions of dollars that are made on it, and the studies in medical journals that are sponsored by the people that sell the drugs. Well, that's it. But you see, if you look at this, and there's a second generation of psychiatric medications that came out after chlorpromazine, yeah, like clozapine and stuff like that. It's about 10 times more expensive to produce because the patents haven't run out. And yet there are studies showing just tiny increases in efficacy between chlorpromazine and clozapine. And those studies are primarily sponsored, about 70% of them are sponsored by the drug companies themselves. It's stunning because it increases the bill on those kinds of drugs like 5-10-fold into the billions. Chlorpromazine is the original discovery, the one thing they trumpet as the big, breakthrough. And clozapine is it, I think, the modern version of clozapine. I'm not really up on these things, but I've just been reading some psychiatric journals, and this really incredibly interesting clinical psychologist in England called Richard P. Benthal, who writes a book called Doctoring the Mind, Why Psychiatric Drugs Have Failed. It's a really interesting book.
I'm just wondering, what kind of transits or series of transits might we experience that would allow people to realize that like Groff's work, that babies in the womb already have all this imprinting
Yes.
And they have all these experiences that, psychology does not start at the moment of birth, you
Yes.
know? What could get people to, in consensus reality, start to understand this?
It's a very big question.
Well, maybe. Certain things are really speeding up right now, evolutionary-wise, I think. And I'm wondering if that isn't one of the things that could happen.
It's starting to happen. I think it's the only graduate program in the entire country. Santa Barbara Graduate Institute is doing a PhD program in pre- and perinatal psychology. And all of their graduate work, you're kind of compelled to study pre- and perinatal psychology as a prerequisite. So, even just the advent of programs like that, where it's...
There are programs, and in the west coast of this country, there's some amazing institutions doing some amazing work, not least at Pacifica and CIIS, where Stan Groff does a lot of work and Richard Tarnas does a lot of work. But yeah, the reality of how the west coast of America translates to like everywhere, and the reality of academic psychology is extremely depressing for many students who want to engage with human nature, but spend a lot of time analyzing statistics. Don't get me wrong as well, by the way, I'm not anti-medication. Some people need to take medication, and that needs to be carefully handled. But the percentage taking it and the way that doctors give out meds like candy. And there was some interesting statistic in this book, this Richard Benthal book, just about how many doctors, psychiatrists, and psychologists had mugs on their desk that were directly sponsored by a conference from a pharmaceutical company. Yeah? Just subliminally all the time. The golf trip to Hawaii that then suddenly sees them prescribe Seroxat the whole time instead of, venlafaxine or whatever.
And how they don't realize what they're doing, because I've got a girlfriend of mine whose sister has been on lithium for bipolar disorder for the last 10 years, that was taken into the hospital with her kidneys shutting down because the lithium is basically too much in her body, and they had to completely take her off the medication. And she's, of course on Medicare and doesn't have the money, but didn't substitute anything and just sent her home.
Neuroleptic antipsychiatric medication has listed side effects that include killing you directly. One of the side effects is a kidney the thing that it looks like a fever initially, but if the medications aren't reduced almost instantly, people can die. They also have these things like, was it affective? I can't remember the pronunciations. All these things, they're basically fancy words for like your tongue might loll around in your mouth, Or tardive dyskinesia, that's it, very good, well remembered. Or like saliva might dribble down your chin while you're trying to talk to someone, Or you'll twitch uncontrollably for like hours, really uncomfortably. These are listed side effects. You might, and percentage weight gain. Some people are known to put on literally tens of pounds within weeks or months of taking some of these medications. It's altering their entire body shape forever. Imagine it happens to a young person who's already depressed about their self-worth, and suddenly, after 3 months of meds, they're like 3-4 stone, 50 pounds heavier.
Mark, I saw a teenage girl literally turn green color from too much Thorazine and being out in the sun. She was like green.
Yes. Dorothy in the Emerald City. Yeah.
Mark, I was going to say, it would be so great if you did this study correlation, because in the late 60s, early 70s, I was obsessed with reading books on psychiatry and psychology. And there was a period when they looked at nurture versus nature, and especially in dealing with schizophrenia, and how much of it is, the environment that we grow up in, or how much of it is our nature, our genetic, composition. Yes. I think that's I remember reading Alan Watts the first time, and so I think people over a period of time have looked into what's normal and what's not normal, and how as a society we decide.
Yep, and the thing that strikes out from a practitioner angle for me is the medical paradigm, the idea that the doctor is law, and many people up to consensus and first stage individuated will follow the doctor's word like law. My mother, our classic running example of first stage individuated consciousness, when my father was sick in the last days before he died, threw all the alternative, anti-worming things, Findhorn flower essences, everything down the toilet in a fit of anger and hurt, you know, where it wasn't, those things weren't at all caused by the huge amounts of, you know, like radioactive medication he was taking, you know. No, they were caused by the flower essences, you know. And yet she's gone back to it years and years later. But it's that struggle because the medical paradigm, the man in the white coat knows what he's doing. He's got your best interests at heart. And frankly, if I break my leg or, you know, my major organ's hurting, I want to see Gregory House, yeah? I really do.
Yes.
He's amazing, yeah? But the reality is, if I'm hurting inside and I'm feeling depressed, I don't want to go anywhere near Mr. House. I want to go and see someone who actually has the time in the day, because these people see so many people. And it's so much easier to hand over a prescription for SSRIs than it is talk to someone. And to me, that's a tragedy. That's a trauma signature in the heart of our society. And lots of those people end up seeing someone like me and they've already been hurt by things or never getting to that point. People are given meds that were designed for kind of short-term periods of time and they're on them for 10, 15, 20 years too. Hugely unknown effects, essentially.
Well, I had 2 points, but so along those lines, there was an article in the New York Times maybe a year ago that they are now treating anorexia with teenage girls with antipsychotic medication because the side effect is weight gain.
It's just stunning, isn't it? It's really, really stunning. Well, there are signs in America, and it's increasing in Britain. Primary school children are being given antidepressants in America. 6-year-olds, in some cases. 6-year-olds. Or just love them, yeah, and hang out with them and work out what they like to do and play. Yeah, it is shocking because it all comes from a convenient fantasy that materialism will out, that technology will out, that we will be saved by these things instead of looking within. Yeah, it's a Capricorn, it is a Capricorn distortion of society, yeah. Yes, exactly. There's no inner work required. Depression's, you know, biochemical imbalance, take these and go away, you know? It couldn't at all be that depression is a natural function of the psyche that's asking you to pause the tape or stop the tape altogether and work out what's already played out and see how you feel about it and whether you've digested it or not. Medication can be supportive for some people. I am not anti-medication. I'm simply anti the attitude of inappropriate, I think, essentially traumatizing use.
Just popped into my head this 12/6 axis and all that Virgo, possibly hypochondria, and since we're talking about medicines, and that's just my only thought. I wanted you to kind of comment.
Well, I see it like a kind of passivity or a victimization. When she's young, all choice is taken away. She has no voice. And then much, much later in life, she's fighting her ex for something that is about speaking her truth, that she loves her children. And she is overcoming the loss that she had no choice about, the sacrifice from the past.
Was Pluto opposing the moon when she came then? Was that, in terms of that being triggered and brought up, was that around the time of the Pluto transiting all of that?
I'm not sure. I think
Gemini?
this was about 2 years ago. I'm not sure. I think Pluto would have been transiting the Uranus.
Yeah.
I think Pluto was opposing Uranus when we had this reading. I don't know the outcome. This is the thing with one-off readings, isn't it? This is why the therapy clients are so useful, and Sawyer. Because there's so much follow-up with the therapy clients because, of course, you're involved for a much longer period of time. All we can say is it felt promising, that she felt that she had a voice now, and that there were groups of people, and particularly a spiritual group that she was a member of now, that could validate that voice inside her. So guys, we've got roughly 10 minutes left. I'll just take questions for a bit, really. I think it's wind down time, myself, after late night dancing and stuff. I was going to show us your chart. Well, I haven't actually got my chart on this computer. What is it? All right, go on then. Does someone, if someone wants to put it in, I'm not going to put it in. So my name's Mark Jones. Okay.
And you don't have to look. Mark, while she's doing it to distract you,
Yes.
there was a question about Uranus,
Yes.
the comma signature in the second house.
Yes.
We talked about it briefly as a value system.
Yes.
And also survival issues.
February 22nd. February 22nd, 71. Am I actually giving these details out in a public room where I'm being filmed? Am I? Yeah, cool. Great stuff. Self-revealing. 5:10 a.m. Bury, B-U-R-Y. Manchester. Oh, England. Yeah, England. There'll be two of them, I imagine, when you put it in. Oh, you'll have to probably go to the atlas, or... Yeah, it's the Lancashire one. Porphyry. I'm a man. Thanks. Just because I was wearing a Union Jack dress last night.
Just kidding.
Okay, that's me. So this guy came to me for a reading because he was really struggling with the idea of being an astrologer in public. That's my chart. Basically, when we look at those symbols, we realize what a beautiful consciousness we're observing. Utterly free from problems. And, yeah, flowers turn and greet him wherever he walks. Although sure. We did say that because of the elliptical orb, an awful lot of people have Uranus opposite Chiron. An awful lot. But yeah. Fair enough. Fair. I still buy it. It's cool. I am. Well, yeah, Mercury, North Node Aquarius. And what am I sat here chatting about? And was it a massive revelation in my value systems that saw me go through these processes or still be going through them to do that kind of thing? Yes, of course. We'll blank this part of the tape later, Yellow Boy. Well, really, I'm going to just pass over this chart to you guys, these incredibly skillful astrologers I share this room with. Soon we're going to break down, have a coffee, some lunch, and you guys can read this fascinating chart. I don't have a lot to say about it. Although, you can see the crisis coming into this life, can't you? The alienation signature, the last degree of Pluto Virgo, the kind of feeling of not fitting in the world or environment you're born into, and how it's only... It was when Uranus and Neptune were transiting my moon, Venus, Capricorn, and squaring the natal Uranus that I had any kind of awakening to see reality outside of that. And things were very, difficult in the teenage years before that point. It's a signature of repression around the instinctual will through the parental conditioning. Venus in Capricorn. Do what I say, not what I do. Yeah. My mum texted me that one day, not that long ago, last year. I rang her up in the day, yeah? And she was talking about how she was going to clean her whole house and do all of this, and I was going, I'm feeling a bit lazy today. I put the phone down, and then I thought, oh, shucks. I cleaned my entire house and started doing some reading or some writing. I rang her back a bit later, and she hadn't done anything. No, I texted her, that's it. She texted back, I'd done nothing. And then she added, do as I say, not as I do. Yeah. For who? In your chart? Well, can I just look at a chart when we're in the break, just to see the whole thing? It's probably easier. No, sure. Uranus, Saturn, and Taurus conjunction. You got any take on it? Well, yeah, Saturn. Yes. Exactly. She's saying that Saturn gave her a lot of fear, and it took her till well beyond a Saturn return to break out of it. With Uranus-Saturn conjunctions or difficult aspects generally, there is a core conflict between suppression and liberation in the life. In Taurus, it's around values. What are my values? What are the values that have been imposed on me by others? What do I really feel about myself on a deep level inside? Taurus and the inner archetype of Venus as the unconditioned self, the way I really relate to myself deep down. Uranus, Saturn there. Imposed values, materialistic perhaps, narrow, conservative, and the real way you feel inside, and the conflict between those two positions.
This is I just want to clarify again, when you see Uranus in a chart, it doesn't mean trauma unless it's making a hard aspect.
Yes. Do you want me to help you by pointing out my trauma signatures?
Yes.
Okay, that's why I maybe thought. So, Uranus is square the moon Venus. Yeah? It's in a yod to Saturn with Mars, if you draw it in fairly wide orb. Oh, it's only within about 3 or 4. You can draw it into a yod with Saturn, see? Uranus-Mars sextile, both of them in conjunct Saturn. If you were feeling really something or other, you could say it's still a Pluto-Uranus conjunction. In Richard Tarnas's terms of the cultural legacy of long-term transits, this is still a Pluto-Uranus conjunction, and it's still a Saturn-Neptune opposition. So, to continue the trauma signatures, what have I got in the 11th? Jupiter and Neptune, square the Sun, trauma signature. So Sun Pisces, and the closest aspect in the chart is the square to Neptune. Prior disillusionment. The spiritual legacy, the loss in the family, the father, the grandfather, sensitive, their sense of meaning, but it's been destroyed on that level. And the Sun is left, in a sense, isolated, victimized in the early part of life, partly pertaining to specific past life traumas of betrayals of trust from figures that they project spiritual meaning onto, but it also gives the young man a chance in the isolation to reconnect with a spiritual source and therefore alter that dynamic.
Do you ever feel like Jeffrey was a father figure for you, or when you first met him, or just a teacher?
That. Yes, I mean.
Because you've got all that Sag.
It's Mars conjunct Mars is what, we got. Yeah. Well, look, we'll wind up this interesting, but I think rather futile discussion. And, yes, sorry, but no, just not that, just the whole chart we're looking at in general feel of the afternoon. Oh. Yes. Cool. I have Urania conjunct my North Node. Now, I did not know that. I genuinely did not. It sounds good. I'm not sure entirely what it means, but I like the sound of it.
The asteroid that has to do with astrology, and Jeffrey has his conjunct Pluto.
Oh, wow.
What's the astrology? What's the asteroid?
Urania. Urania. Insania. That's cool. Great. Well, some would say that I have some kind of destined encounter with astrology. I'm not sure. I'm testing it out.
Correlation, obviously.
Go on.
Okay. So my
my
son has a Saturn-Uranus conjunct. They're 5 degrees apart, but one is in the first. Saturn.
All right, I look in the lunch area, and I'll take some questions about charts.
Okay.
If there's anything about this one, and then we'll just close it down, and I'll be available in the next few minutes about charts. Last question.
Well, just that, and I don't have an answer for it, I just kind of noticed, of course, you have like a double intercepted chart.
Yes.
Yeah, so.
And I didn't know what interceptions were really about.
I don't
It's
even know
fantastic, isn't it?
I've only ever seen one.
Willful blindness. Willful blindness. Why porphyry? Okay, so important technical points Mark hasn't mentioned. Oh my goodness, good question. It's porphyry because Jeffrey Green said so. Was he my teacher at all? No. Jeffrey, man with Pluto conjunct Urania, Insania. He, in his wisdom, decided that Porphyry was more relevant for this kind of work. And who am I to say otherwise, frankly? In Placidus, I'm an 8th house Pluto. In Porphyry, I'm a 9th. That was a big one for me when we first met. So yeah, Porphyry, true node. It says mean node on there, but that's just because we haven't set up Leroy's laptop yet. It's true node we want, Porphyry house system. 12-degree orbs on the evolutionary axis, at least. If in doubt, it is a skip step. If in doubt, it is a trauma signature. Be liberal, folks, yeah? Be liberal. Be inclusive. Egalitarian is the way, yeah? Any other technical stuff that should be considered here? Yeah, Porphyry, yes, Kim.
Could you tell me when we're going to do a group photo just outside door by lunch by the
Yes.
water fountain before we eat lunch?
Okay, cool. Excuse me, the evolutionary axis. Anything involving Pluto and the nodes? Yes, Valerie.
Also be part of a trauma signature there?
Yes.
In Aquarius?
Yeah, because of the Saturn skip step, you see that the mind is enlivened, inquisitive, into stuff, but the conditioning environment is not. And there's a depressive influence there. That's present life. I mean, we could muse on all sorts of levels. I'm sure someone at the back would have me on the mat or something. All right, so we wish this poor soul well, yeah? Good luck, Mark, with all your trauma signatures. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.